so much for being. It is. I just finished a phone call with my mother, and I was telling her that I'm going to be speaking to you, and I was telling her how you are. How do I say? You're one of the brighter lawyers / advocates / legal professionals that I've met. And brighter, I just don't in terms of like your legal proficiency, but in general, listening to you is a delight. And why I say that is because almost all of my background is a legal background. My family is invested in legal professionals, all of them in one form or fashion. And that failed to impress me. And that is why I'm doing this. So congratulations on you, because now I'm more like, tell me, what is it about you? Because you don't even have a regular story, right? You were an engineer before.
Yes. So frankly, I don't know if mine is an abnormal story, because at least from the jurisdiction that you come and the society you come, that's in America, I know for a fact that it's common for engineers to switch to law on a regular basis. Okay. So in fact, JD as a program is one of the few programs which manages to attract people from across the streams, and especially the brightest from the STEM streams as well. Okay. So it is a bit of an abnormality as far as India is concerned, because we are always used to seeing a BA LLB, but not a BE LLB. Okay. That's something that's relatively a new phenomenon. But even I realized when I took up this particular program in 2006 that there were quite a few people who were engineer turned lawyers, and people who had done their undergraduation and graduation in the pure sciences before making the switch to law. The reason that I made that choice, and which is something that I've shared often on public platforms, is because I felt that at some stage I wanted to contribute to public discourse with some kind of training. And I didn't see the point in someone who shoots from his hip in the dark without having necessary tools to speak on a certain particular subject. So I felt that given how I was made, and given my mental constitution, and given my love of logic and reason, law perhaps seemed like the right place to be in. Of course, this was despite a lot of family opposition coming from the fact that we were a lower middle class family which was very clear about the fact that I was interested in engineering because that was my initial love. There was no doubting the fact. Nobody pushed me into engineering. And so it's not as if I saw law as a means of exit from engineering. In fact, I wanted to pursue my master's in aerospace engineering as well. I was geared all for it. But somehow, I think in the final year of engineering, I went through a polarizing transition phase, because campus politics had changed, national politics had changed, a lot of things had happened. And I felt that I was better positioned to contribute to this particular discourse by equipping myself with the qualifications necessary and sharpening my skills of logic, reason, and all that.
This is back when? What year is this?
So 2006 is when I made the switch to law from engineering.
And how was national politics changing back then? Because I was too young to remember. And I mean, I think you have a you have an impression that I'm from America, very much from Delhi. Grew up in Delhi all my life. I just study here in America, and I'm stuck here. I haven't been able to fly back. So how did national politics? No, that's fine. How did national politics change in 2006?
Because 2004, the India Shining campaign flopped, and the Congress government came into power again. And the increasing polarization that we started seeing, and the kind of slandering of indigenous identity and systematic slandering of the indigenous identity that started under UPA 1 was something that was part of my growing years. 2006, I was 20, and I was a witness to all of this. And in fact, when they came to power 2004, I was 19. And the impact of it at a very different level in Tamil Nadu campus politics, I was a witness to all of it. I experienced it firsthand, and I gave it back firsthand as well. So all of this I was a witness to. And then 2008, when I joined law, 2611 happened, and we saw the kind of insipid response that was put up, how we lost people, what kind of a response was given by the then Home Minister and the UPA government, and the kind of systemic slandering, even before the facts were out of the Hindu identity. All of this happened. So that effectively told me that there is a lot to be done on this particular front. While I was not certainly interested in political life, I was certainly interested in public life of some sort. And I felt that law was the shortest path to that particular goal, so to speak. And that's what happened.
You speak like a lawyer. Have you been told that? Like when you have conversations, you have like a very, like I was listening to you with Kushal the other day, and you're like, point number 1, point number 2. And that is exactly the kind of stuff my father would say when he's like going through his case with my mother when they're discussing that stuff. And I was like, he speaks like a lawyer. That's so fascinating. But tell me about the systemic slandering, because, you know, you and I both understand. And I mean, I would be more on the convinced side to your claim than most of the people tend to be. But a large part of urban India is not convinced with this systemic slandering question.
Right.
What is this systemic slander? How do I put a finger on it? How do I nail it down?
I don't think urban India will even understand or will ever be persuaded or convinced, because they themselves have bought into it and they are the ones to indulge in it. Okay. And this is largely because of the years of indoctrination, subtle indoctrination that they go through as part of the education system, the kind of nonsense that pop culture throws at them, and the kind of people who are celebrated as intelligentsia in the community, and the kind of books that are regularly published, and the normalization of, let's say, Hindu phobia and the Brahminization of Brahmin phobia, separating the Brahmin identity from the Hindu identity, separating the caste identity from the Hindu identity when it matters, and equating caste with Hinduism when it is convenient. So all of this has been going on, and I don't think it has not happened before. It has happened systematically. The foundation for which and the seeds for which were sown under Sri Jawaharlal Nehru. I won't call him Pandit because he was not, according to me. So that, let's say, the foundation of cultural Marxism, which was laid under his tenure, I think reached a charam sima, a peak of sorts, in 2000s. And I think that effectively contributed to the change that we saw in 2014. But I still don't think that it has abated, it has waned, it is only growing with each passing day. Because I don't think there is a systematic response or an institutional response that has come about to the nonsense that has been peddled for all these decades. Okay. And there, I think a significant amount of blame must lie not just at the society, but also at the doors of the MHRD ministry and the establishment, which doesn't think it is important for it to respond to this. Textbooks have not seen too much of a change.
What is it in textbooks that, is a systematic slander to the Indic identity?
More than a systematic slander to the Indic identity, see, there are two ways of looking at it. One is to build a positive narrative, and the second is to go after the negative narrative. Okay. The positive narrative is to, first of all, let children know what is the concept of Bharat, where do we come from, what are its origins. And that entire discussion is muddled by this misplaced understanding of secularism. I don't think secularism as a concept is bad, but the manner in which it is understood and the manner in which it is interpreted in India is entirely antithetical to the indigenous identity. And that starts from the textbooks, and that goes on for the next 16 years until, and especially the moment you enter the portals of any humanities university or humanities department, it only increases in vitriol, it increases in its amount of bile that it spews against the indigenous identity. Okay. So textbooks is one reason. Second, an understanding of science is another reason, because we constantly speak of only history and social textbooks. But the fact that science is entirely seen as a Western idea, as a Western concept, as a Western import, where there is absolutely no contribution of India that is ever placed before students, what does it effectively do? On the history front, students are being told that you're a product of a defeated slave society. And on the science front, you're being told that you're boorish, you're savage, you're superstitious, you've never contributed to the concept of science. When it comes to civics, you're being effectively told that every institution that modern India has inherited, so to speak, is an institution that the Britishers have bequeathed to you. That's effectively the statement that's been given. So your sense of identity is gone. Your sense of self-esteem is gone. Your sense of political identity is gone. And your sense of self-esteem when it comes to your brain, which is to say your contribution to the global pool of thought on the scientific front and progress, is also gone. What do you think remains of your identity by the end of your schooling and your college? Nothing. So if anything survives, it is not because of the education system, but despite the education system. Okay, so that's effectively the level at which we all operate. So anyone who's managed to grow a filter thanks to his household training in Bharatiya customs, in our Sanskriti and our belief systems, is largely a product of that particular environment that he's grown up in, despite the kind of bile that he gets to encounter on a regular basis in the outside world. Okay, so we are the lucky few people, but I think we're also the minority in India.
Right. I think, and I've had a lot of discussions with people who generally tend to lean left enough to find the whole BJP phenomena, the whole Modi phenomena to make no sense to them. And I'm like, if it makes no sense to you, it's a personal problem. It's not, because listen, there are so many reasons that I can pinpoint, because it's not one. You have to give the devil its due. The fact that the majority is so overwhelming, not once more than twice, tells you that there's a certain part of India that this government seems to represent, right? And I was of the opinion that this government seems to represent some sort of a right-leaning kind of an idea until I met your friend Ashish Dhar. And Ashish really explained it very well to me. And he said, listen, there does not seem to be a right wing. There seems to be an Indic wing. And then when I spoke to Kushal, he made it more clearer. He's like, listen, they're not very different. They're apples and they're pretty much the same thing, except one of them caters to a particular identity. The other caters to a particular identity in their social conservative front. Right? My question is, how is it that then this government is not doing what you say, that the systemic slander has sort of continued towards the Hindu identity or the Indic identity? How's that happened?
See, I think what we must realize is that a political discourse is perhaps the most expedient, convenient, myopic, and opportunistic discourse possible.
Right. Okay. The worst kind of game theory.
So I don't think it makes any sense to actually put all our eggs in the political basket. And the fact remains that even the political options which are available to the Indic side, and I certainly subscribe to that school of thought which believes that the right wing is not the word to be used for us, it is the Indic wing, and there is a very marked difference. It's not the same thing with a different name. There are serious differences which I hope to explain. The point is, I don't think this government or this establishment, even in its previous avatars, has had a very clear vision of what is the narrative with respect to Bharat that it wants to project within the country and outside the country. Okay. I think the last person to have that kind of civilizational clarity was the founder of the Bharatiya Janasangh, Shri Dr. Sama Prasad Mukherjee. And I don't think anybody after him has actually shared the same level of commitment, conviction, or clarity. Okay. And while they may have seen themselves as the alternative to the Congress establishment, while they may have seen themselves as the alternative to Nehruvian secularism or Nehruvian socialism, but the models, both economic and cultural, that they have adopted is vastly the same, largely the same. The symbolism might be different, the optics might be different, but in practical application and how it has worked on the ground, there is absolutely no difference whatsoever. And the clearest proof of that is that even this government believes that that it is under some kind of a pressure, either constitutional, political, or social, or whatever you call it, where it has to show a progress card ki humne minorities pe itne hazar crore kharch kiye hain. The moment you go down that path, you have not abandoned the majority minority nonsense, which is exactly what you continue to accuse the Congress of even under Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee. So the allegations that you hurled against the previous dispensation, it's thought is the very same path that you've chosen to tread. Okay. So the moment I see that, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Aap usko kuch bhi kahiye. This is how it effectively works on the ground, right? So I don't, and please tell me one thing. Why is it that a non-Muslim has not been appointed as a minority affairs minister so far under any of the BJP governments? Okay. There
That's
can
tokenization.
Be a non-Hindu, non-Muslim minority identity, but there is a policy continuum on this particular thing which the BJP doesn't want to be seen as deviating from, because you see they're also scared of let's say hurting minority sentiments. So the fear of the minority sentiment, which is what held the Congress ransom and hostage for several decades, is the very same fear that continues with the BJP. Therefore, I do believe that there is no change on the ground on those issues.
Don't you think it's a matter of optics not to like the minority, but to the people? The BJP is under serious like a PR threat that they are anti-Muslim all the time, that they are anti-minority all the time. Would you not say that tokenization is to the effect of like, baith jao yaar, we are not that anti-Muslim? What do you think?
So iska matlab ye hai that you lack the fundamental confidence to actually change the narrative, and you have decided to actually stay consistent with the narrative. Okay. So admit that you lack the confidence. So then we'll take it. Then we'll say, fine, aapse itna hi ho paega. Okay.
So
let's assume that.
This second, confidence. Please. No, please. Second.
Confidence is
more
one
interesting.
issue.
Right.
The second point is, according to me, the narrative, according to me, starts when you fundamentally believe that ये सही है या गलत है, उस पे बीजेपी पोजीशन नहीं लेना चाहती है. Okay? And आप कितना भी कुछ भी कर ले, आपको कोई अच्छा सर्टिफिकेट तो देने वाला नहीं है.
Right.
You've been in power since 2014. Right. You were in power from 98 to 2004. किसने आपको अच्छा प्रोग्रेस कार्ड बता दिया? हाँ भाई, आप भी सेक्युलर हैं हमारे हिसाब से.
Right.
Okay? ये ठप्पा तो आप पे कभी लगने वाला नहीं है. Okay? आप पे तो राष्ट्रवादी, फैसिस्टवादी, हरवादी का नाम लग चुका है. ठीक है, ये सब तो हो चुका है. सो आई एम बेसिकली सेइंग, इसके बावजूद आप 2 बार पावर में आ चुके हैं. ओके, एंड तादाद और भी ज्यादा हो गई है. द नंबर ऑफ सीट्स हैव इंक्रीज्ड. ओके, लेकिन आपके कॉन्फिडेंस में कोई इस पे नहीं पड़ा है. ओके, सो नंबर्स आर नॉट द इशू. See, there is a beautiful dialogue from this movie Chariots of Fire that man can't put in what God has not. Okay. अगर आपके अंदर कॉन्फिडेंस नहीं है तो नंबर क्या कर लेगा? Okay. Number हो या ना हो, अगर confidence, that's why I always say that political strength is very different from political will. Sometimes political strength may not exist, but if political will exists, it compensates for lack of political strength. But if there is lack of political will, no amount of political strength can compensate for that particular void. It is fatal. It is fundamentally incurable because ये दिमाग में है, मानसिकता में है, मंशा में है, जो दिशा में दिख जाएगा.
Right. So this narrative that you mentioned, this confidence that you mentioned, the difference, the delta between the right wing and the Indic wing I think these questions are sort of, there is a common theme to these questions, which is that what should this narrative be? What is the Indic wing? Why is there no confidence? And what do you have to say to that effect?
See, the thing is, the primary difference is whenever you speak to anyone who thinks of himself as belonging to the conservative camp, the right camp and all that, they are also subscribing to the same colonialized notion by importing conservative values from the British legacy or the American legacy. Okay. And when you ask them कि right का मतलब क्या है, इनका सीधा जवाब आएगा minimum government, minimum taxation, free market, more support to enterprise. अरे भाई, तो इसका मतलब ये है that fundamentally your concept of a right is more about economics than culture and civilization. ये तो मान लो.
Right.
Okay.
Right. हाँ.
एंड आप ये कहां से निकाल के चेप रहे हैं? यही यूके और यूएस से निकाल के आप यहाँ पे चेप रहे हैं. ओके. सो द लेफ्ट गोज विद द लिबरल कैंप ऑफ द यूएस एंड यूके एंड द राइट गोज विद द कंजर्वेटिव कैंप ऑफ द टोरीज एज वेल एज द राइट ऑफ द यूएस एंड यूके. डेफिनेटली व्हाट यू हैव डन. बट द फंडामेंटल क्वेश्चन इज आपने इस धरती के थॉट से क्या निकाला है? दैट इज द बेसिक क्वेश्चन. दैट इज व्हाट डिस्टिंग्विशेस द इंडिक कैंप फ्रॉम द सो कॉल्ड राइट कैंप. ओके. They are obsessed with market economics because they're effectively saying, had India taken the US approach and had adopted capitalism as opposed to Nehruvian socialist model, we too would have become an America. Therefore, you want to recast India in an American mold. You don't want to do Punarnirman, or let's say you are effectively going for Navanirman. You're saying, let's destroy everything that belongs to the past and build a certain mold which is based on the American mold, of the United Kingdom mold, of the Anglo-Saxon mold, which is not what we are interested in. Because the fatalities, the infirmities, the defects of that particular system is there for everybody to see today. Right from climate change to everything else is a product of that particular worldview, of that particular way of life. And that is the alternative that the Indic worldview offers.
And what is this alternative?
The alternative is to not get stuck in the question of whether I must be socialist or capitalist, because both in the forms as they exist have proven to be detrimental to nature. That is the first thing that we must ask ourselves. What is the fundamental thing around which the dharmic worldview revolves? It revolves around sustainability, it revolves around santulan, it revolves around balance, it revolves around the concept of self-restraint, it revolves around the concept of duty, not a rights-based discourse. The so-called right and as well as the left, both of them fight on the question of rights. The question is, what set of rights is dear to each of them? That is the only distinction.
Right.
Okay. Whereas the Indic worldview effectively focuses on dharma, kartavya, duty. That is the focus. Okay. And it basically says, while you focus on individual freedom, we do believe that unless and until there is some kind of a character building that takes place in the individual, which places the filter of dharma at the core of his personality, there is nothing that you can hope for as far as the society is concerned, because the society is the macrocosmic representation of the microcosm, which is the individual unit. Okay. So we believe in investment in the individual, which translates to societal change and which then translates to universal change. That is the fundamental distinction. But the most important distinction and the provocative distinction is accept, admit that the identity of this country is dharmic in nature. Okay. That is where everything starts. That's where the buck starts and the buck stops. As long as you don't agree, you're no different from the left, you're no different from the Marxist, you're no different from the communist, you're no different from the settler colonialist or any other person. As long as you don't continue to talk, you don't talk about it, and you pussyfoot around this particular issue, to me, you're no different from the previous dispensation.
I have a series of questions. And the first one is this. It sounds good. Like, I'm not going to deny, but I have noticed, and this has been the case. If you read like intellectual history and stuff, there were enough people who were opining whether fascism or communism was the solution back in the early 20th century, because they were frustrated by existing needs. Fact of the matter is, there are ideas that can sound great in insulation, in intellectual bubbles, that probably do not apply to society as a whole. And given the imminent threat of Pakistan on one side, China on one side, who are militarizing with excesses, who are, you know, where capitalism is fueling their excesses, how do we compete in an international political scenario with a dharmic, responsibility driven model?
Okay, so here's the answer to that question. One, factually, let us get a few things right. Communism, or its earlier avatar, Christianity, and all of these institutions, according to me, were invented subsequently. Okay, they existed much later. But if you look at the civilizational span of the Bharatiya thought, that has always existed for millennia together. So I am not asking for the invention of a certain concept or something which is in theory. I am saying this has existed. What has been problematic are its inability to defend its civilization from the barbarian. Okay, that is the issue that you have not addressed so far, because once you address that issue, there are enough building blocks from your past, because that is the tried and tested model. Otherwise, if we were so bad and we sucked at effectively creating a society which is prosperous, तो ये लोग भारत आते ही क्यों? अरे भाई हम पे मेहरबानी करने थोड़ी आ रहे थे. Okay.
Right.
So if they came to India, there was an incentive, and that incentive was created by the existing social structure. The existing social structure was effectively responsible for its economic prosperity and for its social stability, with lot of mistakes and with a lot of flaws. I'm not saying it was perfect, because had it been perfect, it wouldn't have reached where it has. Okay, but this is effectively the phase of introspection. Now coming to the second issue, I'm not therefore saying alienate China or alienate Pakistan, alienate United States, alienate Russia. No. Your only goal at this stage is protection of this landmass and national interest. Okay? Because that is the home of the dharmic civilization. Be very clear about that. 3, as long as the identity of dharma and Indic faiths exist in this country shall continue to exist in the form that it exists today. Otherwise, it will go down the path of a Nepal, it will go down the path of a Sri Lanka, or it will go down the path of Pakistan, Bangladesh, or any other Abrahamized country. Okay? Therefore, the first security which India must have is identity-based security with respect to indigenous identities, which is what will give it the confidence to deal with other people, because then you know आप किसकी रक्षा कर रहे हैं, किस बीज की रक्षा कर रहे हैं. At the end of the day, what drives a certain vision is clarity as to what is the object of protection. आप किस चीज को protect करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं. Let us be clear about that. Okay, which is why Ashish made a brilliant point in one of his videos that धरती की रक्षा किस लिए जरूरी है, क्योंकि ये संस्कृति की रक्षा है, क्योंकि धरती जो है संस्कृति का घर होता है. That's the basic point. A geography is effectively the residence of a certain mindset, a certain civilization. That is why it needs to be protected. Okay. So once you have that clarity, automatically it will clarify in your headspace. If this is the goal, how do I achieve this goal on the geostrategic front, on the foreign policy front, on the economics front, on the culture front, on the soft power front, and every other front? Okay. So this is the clarity that China managed to achieve after its stupid, flirtatious behavior with communism. The moment they realized, yaar, ye to bekar hai, it has effectively helped me consolidate my position, but iske upar isse kuch hoga nahi. Okay. So communism effectively helped the Chinese consolidate that position to basically say, now I have control over this landmass. And after that, they started setting up Confucius institutes and every other institute. Not under, of course, Chairman Mao, but at least under Deng Xiaoping, they started doing it because he decided whatever had to be done has been done. Apna satta abhi yahan pe established ho chuka hai. Now is the time for advancing the Chinese vision. Now imagine, Chinese version of communism believes in advancing Chinese civilizational worldview. Okay, look at how it works. So communism has effectively been rendered subservient to Chinese civilizational interests. Yahan pe Bharat mein ulta hi case hai. Okay. So therefore, here's a clear response, notwithstanding what China is doing, and I think that country needs to get a solid response from Bharat, and it needs to be taught a lessons. But the fact also remains that China has greater civilizational clarity than Bharat has today. That is a fact.
That's a fact.
Okay?
That's a
fact. We are not in a position to respond to them because an insecure product of, let's say, how do I put it? a lot of corruption. Like Pakistan also has greater civilizational clarity, notwithstanding the fact that his civilizational clarity is based on a myth. Okay, he is effectively the product of conversion by rapist invaders. Okay, he knows for a fact that is his history, but he doesn't want to admit it. He revels in that particular history, but he believes that this is my identity. चाहे कुछ भी हो, उसपे तो उतना तो clarity है. The other guy is effectively said, my civilization is the product of Confucius. My civilization is the product of the King dynasty. My civilization is the product of the Middle Kingdom narrative. He is clear about that. भारत ना यहाँ है ना वहाँ है. क्या है ये आप सोच लीजिए.
I was recently talking to somebody, and I was trying to tell them about the shame that you as a Hindu grow up feeling. Hindi is automatically subservient to, like, English is better than Hindi. That's a given. That's a given. You start correct. English, hai na? So all of that stuff, Fair and Lovely, the kind of shit that Fair and Lovely was, the symptom was more a sense of self-shame, self-loathe. Like when I see white people in America now developing this new tumor called self-loathe, I'm like, you have no idea. This is a generational thing back where I come from, right? So there is no denying that. But here's the deal, right? This dharmic society you keep talking about, because dharma is ambiguous enough if used in the context that you and I are using. So help me see what dharma means exactly, because you and I know people have used the concept of dharma to fuel their own missions in one way or the other in the history of India. So how do we pinpoint the litmus test of something like dharma is you consolidate a definition and then let me run the institution that consolidates that definition. And if you're fine with your enemy running that means you've really consolidated the definition of a way of life. So what is dharma?
So let's put it this way. If I were to ask you, explain to me the concept of justice. Is it possible for you to explain the concept of righteous conduct or justice in the absence of a context?
Barely.
It's not.
Barely.
Because you need to understand the boundary conditions of that particular problem, to use engineering.
I know, I sense that. Yes.
So you need to effectively say, what are the circumstances in which you hope to do justice, right? That is the first question. Okay. So which is why dharma is not vague. Dharma is not subjective. Dharma is contextual. That is the difference. Okay. So the concept of justice that we understand in Roman jurisprudence or Anglo-Saxon jurisprudence, it effectively comes from what? It comes from this three-letter word called jus, or J-U-S, jus. Okay, that's what it comes from. Okay. So from jus comes res, which is from the concept of justice comes the concept of law. Okay, or the concept of lex. Okay. So the point I'm trying to make is, dharma is a foundational jurisprudential concept, which is basically from the standpoint of what? As a civilization, as a culture, what is the bedrock of our values? Okay. So from that particular Gangotri comes the Ganga in different forms. If dharma is this particular basic understanding, how would it apply to gender justice? How would it apply to contractual relationships? How would it apply to marital relationships? How would it apply to environment? How would it apply to interpersonal relationships within a society? How would it apply to foreign policy? Okay. Now, dharma is a concept effectively, therefore, it speaks of righteous conduct. And let us be very clear that there are several schools of thought in India, in traditional Bharat, where the definition of dharma has been changing. That is a fact. Okay. However, it is possible for each dispensation to adopt for itself a different definition of dharma if it wants to. There is no harm in it. But let it at least be a definition that is indigenous, that is consistent with the spirit of this particular land. Okay. The funny part is, you have never heard the concept of dharma being applied in policy making at any point of time in Indian modern independent history. Okay. Have you ever heard that when we speak of dharma, this is what we come to? We speak of the realm of commons, we speak of private property, we speak of everything. But dharma has never been mentioned by any ministry whatsoever, except in ornamental use whenever they have to give speeches or they have to release books in the name of law and justice and dharma. बस इतना ही बोलना है, उससे ज़्यादा उनको कुछ पता नहीं है और उनको कुछ अपनाना भी नहीं है. Okay. So my fundamental definition is, it effectively seeks to strike a balance between individual rights and societal duty. Okay. Your freedom as an individual to act at your own will, on your own whim, and the kind of fetters that are imposed on that as a consequence of you being a part of a certain unit. Okay. So this awareness that you cannot act independent of society's interests, and हाथ में कुल्हाड़ी मिल गया तो इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि आप वन को काटते जाएंगे, because you have a certain responsibility. that is the concept that dharma imposes. That is the fetter. It is, according to me, a balance between right and duty.
Interesting. So you would then, what you're pushing for is dharma as a almost like a legal bedrock, as a cultural bedrock. Right. In a place that is so saturated with diversity, as where you and I come from,
right?
If I take up the concept of not looking after myself for the interest of the other, because the other is a composite of so much and so many different tangents and so many different vectors,
right?
Do you not see like an obvious obstacle coming in the way where I'm like, I can't even act, this is paralysis, because almost everything I do in this situation dharmically would not make sense. How do you make sense of that?
The answer to that lies in the history of the princely states before 1947. आपको 1000 साल 2000 साल पीछे जाने की जरूरत भी नहीं है. You don't have to go back into ancient history at all, because princely states, especially Hindu princely states, functioned on the concept of dharma only. Okay, you can take the princely state of Travancore, you can take the princely state of Mewar, you take the princely state of, let's say, Mysore, and each of these states were effectively Hindu princely states which functioned on Hindu dharma. And what is most important is none of these princely states had a homogeneous population. Okay, you had people speaking different languages, practicing different cultures, part of this particular princely state. Okay, therefore, what has happened actually, which I think is most problematic, is the creation of states in 1956 exclusively on linguistic basis, which is the reason we see each other as different people. Okay, because you come to the conclusion that the Hindi way of life is different from the Telugu way of life, is different from the Tamil way of life. The fact is, you have lived in porous borders, you have lived in porous political entities, and you have lived side by side with each other. As a product of Hyderabad, let me tell you, Hyderabad, even under the Nizam, had Parsis, Bengalis, Kannadigas, Malayalis, Telugus, Tamilians, Maharashtrians, name it, it was there. That's why in Hyderabad you can survive without speaking in Telugu. That's the cosmopolitan nature of it. In Bangalore you can survive without speaking in Kannada because Tamilians have existed there for centuries now. Okay. Parts of Kerala, there is a particular breed called the Palakkad Brahmins or the Palakkad Ayers. Their Tamil and Malayalam are both different. Tamilians don't consider them Tamil and Malayalis don't consider them Malayalis. They're na ghar ka na ghat ka. Why? Because 600, 700 years ago, from Trichy in Tamil Nadu, they went to Palakkad. That's the nature of this land. Who are the priests in Badrinath and Kedarnath? People from the south. Who is the priest in Nepal? He is from Mangalore. Look at the kind of transactions we have had and institutions which are associated with the identity of your culture. A man from the south effectively is there. Shankaracharya goes and establishes Pithas all over the country. That Sharda Peeth is effectively what Kashmiris are fighting for. Who are they fighting for in today's language? They're fighting for an institution set up by a Mallu from Kerala. Really, right? Think of it this way.
Right.
So our compartmentalization of identities is a product of 1956, and it's post that, not before that.
What is 1956?
Reorganization of states based on language.
Achha. So
under the genius so-called Nehru. Because Rajagopalachari told him, don't do it, split the country into administrative zones so that people learn to talk to each other, and there is no concept of language shamanism, and that each state will have at least 3 official languages so that people can say that even my language is represented, so that you can have languages rotate on a yearly basis or an annual basis or a biennial basis. Okay. So today what is happening is language chauvinism, which is effectively translated to sub-regionalism, which is prevailing over civilizationalism, and your Indian identity is rendered subservient. That's the problem. Your entire question has its origin in this issue.
Right. You know, I mean, it sounds pretty amazing. You know, it sounds you're a very passionate speaker, and I'm convinced, but I'm also a little anxious. And by this caricatured question, by the means of this caricatured question, I'm trying to bring out this common anxiety I'm sure a lot of people will face when they hear you. It's like, this is too radical. Like, we're finally making progress on giving women equal rights. We're finally making progress on 377, right? Like, you know, this is what you're saying is too radical. How do I make peace with that? How do I just reinvent?
Because I think the problem, as I said, goes back to education, because we have to point out, यार 377 कब आया? किसने introduce किया?
हाँ, हमने तो नहीं किया. हाँ, right.
हमने तो नहीं किया, right?
नहीं.
Second, please tell me is there recorded, documented history of persecution of non-binary gender identities and transgender identities in the Hindu culture? The answer is a no. Okay, you will not find that.
In fact, celebratory. In fact, it's celebratory.
Celebratory is one aspect, but most importantly, the reason why it is celebratory is not because they said let's celebrate it, because they said Geo or Jeene do.
Right.
Live and let live. Okay. As long as they don't cause any harm, and that is the identity that they're comfortable in, why should we stop, stifle, quell, subdue, or suffocate anyone? That's the basic question that was put. Okay. And if they want a certain form of practice, and if they want institutions which are exclusively dedicated to them, let us give them that space. That has been the approach. So I don't need a lecture on LGBTQ from anyone from the West or the liberal camp. I'm sorry, we have done this way before you. If anything, you come and sit at our feet and we will teach you how to deal with these people. Okay, and what kind of rights you're supposed to give them, how considerate and how passionate you're supposed to be about their rights, and how sensitive you're supposed to be about these rights. Okay, so women rights ki jo baat hai, we have to understand. I think you should just read Max Muller's brilliant short book, India, What It Can Teach Us. Okay. Despite the controversy surrounding his position on India, on the Aryan invasion theory, on racism and everything else, just read that book, because the one thing that he's very clear about is, for a society to continue to retain its moral fabric, despite having been constantly invaded, bullied, massacred, plundered, raped and everything, even in the medieval period, around that period, Hindus were still known for their truthfulness, for their, commitment to justice, for their ability to keep their word in commercial transactions, despite every form of invasion, which effectively shows the strength of the character of this particular civilization. So whatever has happened by way of a parda system, or by way of, let's say, the treatment of women, or giving them a so-called patriarchal protection, okay, is the okay. You have to ask anyone who's lived as a
right.
Sorry?
You were sort of cutting out. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
So you should ask anyone who's lived under the Nizam as a Hindu. Okay, in Hyderabad, if let's say you were walking on the streets and you did not have the parda, and the Nizam's entourage was on the streets, he and his soldiers will pick up women, okay? And this is during the Nizam period, even in the 1940s, by the way. Imagine what the situation would have been in 1100s, 1200s, 1500s, and 1600s. Okay?
Right, right.
So when people talk of the Parda system, they don't understand that the impact of these barbaric invasions, which effectively treated women as war booty, has had a significant role to play in how rules were evolved by the society as a response mechanism.
Interesting. But you know what? The fact still remains, like modern India is not, how would you say, is not nice to its transgender community. We relegate them to chakkas and hijras, and they must band together and live together. And you know, like, and it's not just that. Like we might have been more civilized. We might have been more tolerant, more inclusive back in the day when we had more agency over ourselves. But the modern narrative is convoluted enough to the point where it is very hard to make sense of the ancient narrative, right? And so my question is, I can imagine what you were saying as a way of life, and I can be like, let's go back to it. But one, that change is too radical. I don't know what the uncertainty is too much for me to be like, okay, let's get on board with J Sai. And on the other hand, there is a question that, you know, is this ancient narrative only romanticized, or is there genuine merit to this narrative that we, you know, pat ourselves for?
Right. There is a brilliant thing about language is that it hides a lot of history in it. So since I'm assuming you come from the Hindi speaking background, I have a question for you. Chakka, mawali और हिजड़ा, इन तीनों का etymology मुझे बताइए. ये कहाँ से आते हैं? इन words का origin क्या है?
No idea. Tell me, क्या etymology है? हाँ.
तो पहले मवाली का जो कॉन्सेप्ट है ये ईरान से आता है. ओके, ये इसलिए ईरान से आता है that when Arabs invaded Iran and they converted the Persians to Islam, the Persians had to attach themselves to an Arab master to have social standing, to have social recognition. That particular system was called mawali, and the system was called mawala, and the Persian guy was called mawali. ओके मवाली का मतलब है सेकंड ग्रेड ह्यूमन बीइंग एंड सेकंड ग्रेड सिटीजन, ठीक है। तो ये है उसका ओरिजिन। तो ऑब्वियसली ये भारत की संस्कृति से तो ये नहीं आया मवाली, ठीक है। दूसरा, आप मुझे ये बताइए, हिजड़े, हिजड़ा, ये आपको शुद्ध हिंदी से आया लगता है या फिर किसी और भाषा से ही आया है आपके हिसाब से? ये तो शुद्ध हिंदी का कोई
वर्ड लगता नहीं। हाँ हाँ, sounds not that.
Is not from शुद्ध हिंदी at all.
हाँ.
Okay.
हाँ.
It comes from Urdu. It comes Arabic. Let people decide their own. They come to their own conclusions. Okay. So the point I'm trying to make is modern India is effectively a caricature, a hodgepodge of a lot of impacts and consequences that have crept into the culture over a significant period of time. And इसको reverse कैसे करते हैं? You have to learn from the Israeli experience, because the first thing that they did was to invest in education, was to change the mindset of the people through education. Hebrew was almost a dead language when the state of Israel was sought to be established between 1920 and 1948. There was a huge movement within the Jewish community, the international Jewry, for revival of Hebrew. In fact, it was one person who started it, who was branded a crackpot by the rest of the Jewish community, by the way. Okay. And by the time he died, Hebrew had been adopted as the national language and had been introduced in schools. That is the point. Okay. Right. All of this ultimately goes back to education, because education is effectively the reason for the building block of your head space. So there is a beautiful concept that is accepted in psychology and as well as in jurisprudence, which is there is something called as pure reason and there is something called as adulterated reason, or let's say reason that you get from the rest of the world. Pure reason का मतलब ये होता है, filter होता है, वो दुनिया से प्रभावित नहीं है. Whatever you are born with as a filter as a person, independent of any conditioning from the rest of the world or even your family, is pure reason. Whereas when the family and the society starts teaching you a few things, it corrupts reason and it adds to your reason. Okay, it corrupts or at least it adds. What the biggest form of adding to the pure reason is what your family teaches you and what your education teaches you. So I'm saying that acquired reason is largely a product of education and what the values that are imparted to you by the family. Okay. The one thing that I strongly believe in is that the best way to test whether my hypothesis is utopian, is ideal, is unworkable and practical is by changing the textbook curriculum. Okay. Now, if you change the manner in which education is imparted in India and the production of knowledge systems in India, I am asking myself, is it too far-fetched to basically say that education has an impact on the kind of people the society faces and the society itself? If not, what is the point of education, right? The reason why we invest in education so much is because we believe it will have an impact on society, okay? Right. Imagine, assume for a moment that you're a judge who has done his master's in law in jurisprudence from Oxford or from, let's say, Yale or Stanford. And I am trying to present to you the validity of Sabarimala as a practice, and I'm trying to explain to you the traditions that we believe in, and I'm trying to explain to you the worldview of the Indic position. You're educated in Oxford, you're educated in Cambridge. Why would you have any respect for my way of life? Why would you have any concern for my way of life? Why would you have any belief or even some dignity for my way of life? You're bound to look at it as a savage practice. You're bound to look at it from the standpoint of, let's say, male chauvinism and patriarchy, because that is the basic foundation of the Abrahamic worldview, not the Indic worldview. Okay? So all the movements that you have needed are movements that you have needed in the West to counter toxic masculinity that comes as a product of Abrahamism, not because of my religion, not because of my culture, not because of my civilization. Feminism has its origins in those societies where Abrahamism has effectively believed that a woman is secondary to a man, is inferior to a man, that she is only the product of sex and she is a creature of sex and she is a fundamentally promiscuous creature. That is not the Indian worldview, right? So all of this ultimately traces and goes back to the question of education. So the best way to test out whether my position has any validity is to at least see if a generation comes out differently because of a different form of education. Okay? Because you see, if people like me and people like Ashish have managed to survive the education system because of access to other sources,
Right.
Imagine what kind of a society you will produce if our worldview becomes effectively the mainstream form of education. Then my position becomes the normal. You become the outlier, right?
Right. Right. But my question is, I'm sure, like, I for one know that RSS has shakhas and they teach students, and that's happening. Are they producing a different crop? Is that microcosm a fit enough experiment to imagine what your worldview looks like? Or is
the
the
less said
RSS
about the RSS, the better. Okay, because
I do understand.
the word intellectualism and RSS don't go together.
Right.
Okay, at least in the manner in which the organization exists today, they have moved far away from the vision, the depth, and the intellectualism of Madhav Sadashiv Kolvarkar, known as Guruji, and Sri Hedgewar, Dr. Ji. Their works, their writings, their thought was phenomenally superb, and they were vastly ahead of their successors in time. Okay, I may have my disagreements with them, just as I have disagreements even with Swami Vivekananda and everybody else. And there's a decent chance that my disagreement is based on ignorance, that I'm in no position to disagree with any of these people. Okay, that's also a possibility. However, the fact remains that the RSS as an organization over a point of time has reduced itself merely to an organization that turns up for humanitarian aid and help. Okay, beyond that, they have nothing of value which is added in the Shakha. Okay, they don't know how to respond to the left ecosystem. They perhaps know how to canvass and organize during the course of elections, but on a civilizational front, from the standpoint of having a vision, from the standpoint of having a narrative, very few people are exceptions to this particular rule from within the RSS who are capable of articulating their position with clarity, with information, with erudition, and who are in a position to debate a person from the left in public. Okay, I am saying, let's have a public debate. Let's bring the best of the left and the best of the people from RSS. Let us see what happens. Okay, I have nothing against that organization, because you see, at 70,000 shakas, assuming that there are 10 people per shaka, you have a 7 lakh, let's say, strong force, right? You're looking at a human resource of 7 lakhs. And assuming that it's close to 1 million, that is perhaps the second largest organization after the Indian Army. Okay, at least when it comes to, let's say, an organization which is cultural in nature. So 1 million human resource can effect a lot of change if it wants to, provided they are equipped to handle the issues, provided they're trained to handle these issues. Okay, I don't believe that the Shakha as it exists today necessarily serves that purpose. The only thing that it perhaps serves best as an interest is that it manages to canvass on the ground fantastically around the election time for the BJP. Beyond that, I don't think it serves as an actual intellectual formidable force. I honestly don't believe that. And I say this as someone who doesn't wish ill for that particular organization.
Right.
I say this as someone who wishes that perhaps the organization knew how to go about doing better. It doesn't know how to read the room, is my opinion.
So the reason why I asked that question was because I was trying to explore if there is a safer experiment that will reveal the results of what you propose, right? It's like, because listen, I mean, I'm all for it, like I said, but it just is a very anxiety-inducing notion for the world to flip head over heels for me. Like, I am in the middle of my, like, you see what I mean? That it's a change too radical, and I wonder if there is any alternative means that you could suggest to me. So, like, one of the places that you could suggest to me is, pick up Vivekananda, pick up Swami Vivekananda and start reading. So one, you get a theoretical grasp, right? That is one place that I need to acquire myself with the Indic worldview. Because why I like your solution is that it's not limited to BJP is right or Congress is right. And I'm sick of that discussion. Oh my God, can we please stop?
Correct.
None of them is right. So at least this is an out of the box approach. This is what you call pure reason, first principles thinking, that, there is a third solution, that we need a synthetic or, an antithetic solution to what has been the case. And I'm for that. Is there, maybe debates might help. What would be a more sober experience to run than changing the demographic entirely in one go?
I don't think it's even right to think of changing the demographic entirely, because people who are practicing the faith of their ancestors, whether it was inherited or converted or received, is not the issue. I don't think we should do that at all. What we're looking for is a sense of civilizational unity and a civilizational awareness. So I'll give you straight, pinpointed, specific responses. Look at the products of students coming from institutions run by the Chinmaya Mission. Okay. Look at the products coming from institutions run by Mata Amritanandamayi. look at the products of students coming from institutions of any of the, let's say, traditional acharyas or mathas or ashrams. Okay. These people effectively represent the island of Bharatiya identity in an otherwise Macaulayan identity. Okay. The marked difference that you see in their approach to this land and its values compared to those who come from convent educated schools is there for everybody to see. The self-loathing nonsense is effectively a product of, let's say, coming from convent educated schools, not from these schools. Even the DAVs have produced fantastic people. Okay. The thing is, these children and these products are outnumbered and outflanked by people who come from the convent educated schools and the Macaulay form of education. Okay. So what can we do? Why do you think people like me are fighting for, or at least advocating seriously, freedom of temples? So the temples have resources to run their own schools. Okay.
Right.
So that it can be broad-based, and therefore every tradition, every parampara, and every form of life and every form of epistemology is mainstreamed through education. Now, since I'm a lawyer, I'll give you a constitutional peg to this. Okay. Articles 26, 29, and 30 of the Constitution effectively give rights to communities to establish educational institutions, because the framers of the Constitution realized that the best way to keep a way of life alive is through education. This is in Constant Assembly debates. This is through judgments. That is why every charitable entity, whether it's religious or non-religious, establishes two things: schools and hospitals. Okay, one is for service, the other is for education. Why do you think the church does this? Why do you think even in America this happens? Because education is fundamentally the way to shape people's minds. And for that, you need resources. For you need an institution, that you need institutional autonomy. Therefore, you need institutional freedom. That is why Hindu institutional religious freedom is important. Okay. Ashrams are exempt from these legislations, and that's but temples are governed and stifled by these legislations. That's why they can't run their schools independently. If you want to establish a Hindu-oriented school in the state of Tamil Nadu, regardless of it being ruled by the DK, DMK, or ADMK, or whoever it may be, you face a wall of resistance, because the bureaucracy is full of people who are fundamentally against the indigenous identity. Okay. So therefore, my suggestion is, and here's something that I have to address, and this is very important. Please don't underestimate the power of an intransigent minority that is hell-bent on never giving up its way of life. You need not produce 1 billion people who think like this. You only need to produce enough people who say that दुनिया इधर की उधर हो जाए, मैं अपने जगह से नहीं हिलूंगा. Okay? Because it is only a handful of people who ultimately bring a change, the rest only follow. That is how effectively things have changed. Okay? So you need people who act as influencers, who are gateways, who act as guardians of certain gateways, who effectively say, I'm sorry, this is the only way to go ahead because this is what bodes well for the civilization. Okay? And when you don't change your position, the rest of the world has to decide. Either we accommodate or we move into conflict. 9 out of 10 times the world accommodates.
Right.
The person who doesn't budge and the person who doesn't compromise is effectively the one who wins. Take Jinnah, for example. He had the better of Mr. Gandhi.
Right. And so from what I understand, this new way of life is a very inclusivist, it's like everybody, you do you, let's maintain this tradition because there is something valuable to be pulled out of it. There is a reason why it survived for so long. And that, so I understand that. And it's rather interesting. And I will for sure walk out more convinced of this conversation of the Indic identity more than ever. So if somebody had to begin exploring this notion more than what JSD can offer, more than what maybe Upward or the Indic Collective, which is your organization, by the way, fantastic job. I mean, it is so entertaining when I receive text messages from WhatsApp messages from Upward, which I think is part of the Indic Collective, right? And I'll receive a text message and it'll have like a fairly provocative title, and then you're like, wait a second, my instinct just goes off. It's like red alert, and then I look into it and there is so much sense being made. And that's how I introduced Ashish to my friends. I'd be like, he's one of the only few people on the opposite side of the mainstream that's making sense. You have to listen to that guy. You cannot discard him as just another right-wing loony like you do to the rest of the crowd. Like, I understand your political position, but really pay attention to what he's saying. And I think him for sure deserves more recognition for his cognitive horsepower.
Without a doubt.
right?
So in fact, let me just state a few things for the record.
Right.
I don't run Upward. I don't own Upward, but I have the pride of actually working with this particular team and knowing them well. Ashish and Ajay Sharma are the ones who founded Upward and who run Upward. Indic Collective, I contributed to its establishment, but I'm not a trustee. I'm just the lawyer to that collective, to that particular institution. Mm-hmm. And Indic Collective and Upward on a regular basis, they work on projects wherever it's possible. But credit must be given to Ashish's vision, because he has managed to come out with a fantastic model that makes it possible for people to consume the most important bits of information in the shortest time possible, in the most conducive manner possible in today's circumstances. People don't read. They can't even read beyond 2 minutes or 5 minutes. And therefore, people are addicted to the visual medium. So Upward, and in fact, the other channel that he set up, which is free, brilliant initiatives, much needed initiatives. And I believe that if people support these initiatives, if they support organizations like Indic Collective, Upward, and Free, these organizations are capable of turning around the narrative in a significant way for the better. Okay. And so therefore, through your platform and through your channel, I'd certainly like to urge your listeners, your watchers, and your readers, and whoever they may be, to support these organizations in whichever way they can. And as someone who's an outsider to these organizations, but is only a legal mentor to one of these organizations on a pro bono basis, I've seen the work that these people do. I've seen the commitment that they have to this particular cause. And the most important point is that they have created impact on the ground through their strategic interventions. Okay. So this is not talk. There's a lot of action.
Right. That's absolutely true. I would at least say that they sharpen the discourse, because I think on a general level, we have a very low resolution discourse, right? As far as politics is concerned. So I'm glad for that. And I will make sure I attach links to all these free, Upward, as well as the Indic Collective, so people can find you there. But where do I find more of this thought? My question is, what is the network I should be looking into? Not just modern day, but should I look into Paramahansa Yoganand? Should I look into Swami Vivekanand? Where do I go?
So, I strongly believe that I'm merely repackaging the literature that I've already read to a significant extent. Okay, I don't consider myself a pioneer at all. I don't consider myself a thought leader at all. I'm merely presenting those views in a slightly more relatable way to the current generation. So, what is it that I have learned from? Who are the sources that I have gone to? I have read Dr. Meenakshi Jain. I have read Sri Sitaram Goel. I have read Sri Ram Swarup. I have read Sri Dharampal. I have read Sri Konrad Elst. I have read Sri Radha Kumud Mukherjee. I have read Sri Jadunath Sarkar. I have read Sri Ramesh Chandra Majumdar. I have read books published by the Bharati Vidya Bhavan, K.M. Munshi, Rajagopalachari. Okay. And I have read books written by Sri Michel Danino. Okay. These are my sources. Swami Vivekananda. See, the thing is, when we get into the civilizational aspect, the problem is we jump directly to spirituality. Are bhai, spirituality is there. That is there. I'm saying Paramhamsa Yogananda ke paas daudne ki zarurat nahi hai. Uska, that is a different stage altogether. That is a different level altogether. You are looking at practical, applicable, civilizational narrative, which works on the real world front. I'm not saying spirituality is not real. I'm simply saying it is at a different plane altogether. Adhyatma, of course, is the soul of Bharat, and there is no running away from it. But how has Adhyatma been applied and understood in real world contexts, in mundane contexts, like in politics, in culture, and other aspects? That is the literature that I'm more interested in, because I don't think I'm ready for spirituality fundamentally. I'm not made for that yet. Okay. Right. I do believe I understand that that's the soul and the spirit of Bharat. Unfortunately, my soul is not ready to receive that yet. Okay. Because I'm still fighting, or let's say addressing certain aspects, and God willing, force willing, someday when that happens, it will happen. But the literature that I would recommend is the literature that charges you into action. Okay. That effectively tells you what this land is about, where does it come from, what is its beating pulse and its heart. Okay. That is what I would effectively say. And which is why I'm not recommending books, I'm recommending authors. These are the people that I certainly want to read.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. I could say that I'm decently read. I know of things. I am generally, but I barely have heard of more than 3 or 4 names from the list you mentioned. So that probably makes a case for your point that anybody who's educated on the convent side of education is almost bereft of the historical aspects of the narrative, at least that you're proposing. So I think that is solid, because I'd say I'm fairly read. But anyway, this has been fantastic. I have learned a lot. Thank you so much for doing this. Do you have any questions for me?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to know more about you.
All right. So I'm a student of psychology and economics here at Columbia University. I was doing my chartered accountancy. Both my parents are chartered accountants turned legal professionals in the economic field, the commercial economic law field. I never wanted to do that. I hated it from the bottom of my heart. Chartered accountancy. And then even arguing over numbers. Oh my God, like let's not argue over numbers, you know? So, so eventually I was like, I gave my finals CAK, and in the meanwhile, I received an acceptance letter from Columbia. So I came to Columbia wanting to know what I wanted to study in the first place. I wanted to see the world. I wanted to see what it looks like from the outside. And so that's when I began to flirt with philosophy, art, eventually settled for psychology and economics. Then I was doing a lot of my own research, and a lot of it was coming through the primary means of podcast until I was like, you know what, I'll start my own. And it started off as a joke where I was speaking to my friends and we were having casual conversations. And eventually it moved from one step to the other, where eventually I was hanging out with, say, Ashish for that matter, or some more prominent. And then I was like, you know what, I'll just take this forward. So I became this YouTuber / student kind of a person. I'm still in the middle of transitioning. I think I'll drop out of school for a year because I'm going to put more pedal into this gas. It's doing very well for me. And then eventually come back and study with peace, because truly what I like is reading. Truly what I like is peacefully doing my thing, you know? And so right now, while I'm doing this, it's practically impossible for me to continue studying. So I'll get this done with, make enough for myself, and then come back, finish my education in peace. So I'm in that moment where I'm waiting to fly back to India, because that doesn't seem to happen. And once that happens, I'd be there for a year. So that is where I come from. I grew up in Faridabad, which is right next to Noida. So in some sense, we're remote neighbors. And I moved here in 2017. So since then, since the upswing of the woke culture, I have been observing up until this collapse finally happened in Seattle. So I've been first-hand witness to this. It's been pretty fantastic. You get a very outside view of India. Once you do move outside, you're like, "Acha, theek hai, now I can see it more objectively." I was too invested in things, you know. Like I like Taleb's skin in the game concept. You need to have skin in the game to have an opinion. But I also think the absolute inverse, no skin in the game, lets you have, and if you're committed to the job of thinking properly, lets you have a very unique opinion too. So once there was no skin in the game for a short amount of while, I was like, "Acha, theek hai, now I can look at India properly." And then I got invested in it again. And I think some of the most transformational conversations I've had during these podcasting sessions have been with the one I had with Ashish, the one I had with Kushal, and then this one is sort of a lineage unto itself, where it's talking about the same thing which is not mainstream. Most people will tell you the same mainstream bullshit. It's Congress, it's BJP, it's Aam Aadmi Party, and that does not satisfy my soul.
I'm tired of that nonsense. I'm out of that.
Right, but you know, I mean, I think I don't know who suggested. I think Ashish probably was the first guy to suggest me to talk to you, and then the suggestions kept pouring in massively in my comment section. And then when I was like, it was just like, invite this guy. And I looked you up and I was like, this is a fantastic setup, but I just did not know how to approach. That's why I tried to ask Ashish, and I was like, when I'll come back to India, I'll for sure make an approach. But then Zoom became the thing, and then, you know, that's how it came to be. So I'm 24. I'm a student of economics and psychology, formerly an ex-accountant, almost never finished it. I did finish my company secretaryship, so I can still argue in courts. And I think part of my genes, the lawyer instinct, is still present in me. It's just used for different means by now. So, so it's been fun. It's been quite a journey. It's been quite a journey, and I've learned a lot throughout.
Thank you for actually having me over. It's been so great, and I'm really amazed that at the age of 24, you know so much, and you have had this realization. I wish I was as well read as you at the age of 24. So congratulations, and I wish you the very best for all your endeavors.
I'm pretty sure at 24 you were doing better than me. So I'm not concerned for that. I'm still a degenerate at 24. But no, thank you so much. If I'm in India and if I'm around, I'll make sure I hit you up. If we can do this again, if you have something that you want to talk about, please feel free. This platform's always
by the time you come, there'll be a lot more developments in India worth discussing further.
For sure. For sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you.